To start off, I think it's appropriate to say that American English has more translations of the Bible than any other language probably ever has, at least that we have records of. So there's tens of millions of dollars that are also spent recording audio Bibles with Hollywood superstars, and English has more biblical resources than any other language. So I'm sure that all of us are wondering, why is there another Bible translation in English? If you're not wondering that, that's definitely something any of us on the team have wondered. And the real question is, what difference could an oral Bible translation in English actually make? So I and several other people who are now really committed on the team really never wanted to be involved in English Bible translation because we didn't see a need. But at this point, we have a firm conviction that there really is a great need for an English oral Bible translation. And so we're going to tell you the story of not only how we became convinced of that, but how this project became a reality. So um, our founder, Nathan Payne, the founder of the Spoken English Bible, he's the son of the Paynes who worked in Peru. And he grew up going between the main base in Peru and then the villages of the people that his family were translating the Bible for, the Ashinga people. Now, Nathan didn't know it at the time, but as you can imagine, he was constantly surrounded by primary orality. Eventually, Nathan went to college in the U.S., and by this time, the Ashinga people had a lot of the New Testament, but the church was still small among the 3,000 or so people that were spread across 30 or 40 villages in the Ashinga area. Now, during Nathan's senior year of college as a chemical engineer, he and his wife heard stories from his parents about how God's Spirit had started to use a new method of evangelism and discipleship to bring a lot of the Ashinga people into the kingdom. We now call this method oral storying, and I don't know how much of a name they had for it back then. But this is the story that Nathan heard. He heard that missionaries with the International Missions Board of the Southern Baptist had approached his dad and had asked him for help getting some stories translated into the language of the Ashinga people. And so his dad started working with them and found that they needed some more guidance and really equipping with sound translation principles. And so he had them partner with the people who had already been translating the New Testament. Now, what happened was incredible. One of the Bible translators had memorized all 40 stories in the set, and he traveled by canoe from village to village. Whenever he arrived, the whole village would stop what they were doing, gather around, and listen to him tell Bible stories. And within 2 years, 25% of all of the Ashinga people had decided to follow Jesus. So a church was born. And when Nathan heard that this happened among the people that he grew up with, that he played in the rivers with, that he fished with, in the area that he knew so well, he and his wife knew right then what they needed to do. He stopped looking for any chemical engineering jobs, and he started applying to Wycliffe, and sort of the rest is history. He was one of the founding members of the one-story partnership between SIL, YWAM, IMB, and I'm sure that there were some others who were involved as well in the one-story partnership. And they had many years of fruitful history. It led to hundreds of teams being launched, workshops in just about every continent, and a lot of really good work. And in 2019, there we go, I'll switch to right here. Nathan and the YWAM team that he was working with felt God's Spirit invite them to use their decades of storying skills to make some oral Bible translation drafts in English. So Nathan invited Dr. Heather Beal from Dallas International University to form a sister team. And the two teams ended up starting to translate the book of Luke together. Now, I don't know how many of you have translated Luke, but Luke is a long book. and it's really a daring one to start off with. So after they got through 5 or 6 chapters, they decided that they would pause and actually translate some shorter books like Ruth and Jonah. Now, the same time that this was happening, oral Bible translation was really coming to the attention of a lot wider audience in the translation movement. At one point, this is around 2020, Brian Harmelink invited Nathan to create some story style exegetical resources for a team of Native Americans to use while translating Colossians. The results were incredible. The teams were able to listen to the stories that Nathan told and gain a deep understanding of the structure and the purpose of Colossians, and then translate it very efficiently and very accurately in the short workshop period that they had. Now, the same time that that was happening, Braun Cleaver, I know many of you may know her, she began making her exegetical resources and outlines for translation teams as she was doing work in Siberia. And a group of people started to come together from SIL, Dallas International University, Seed Company, Faith Comes by Hearing, and some other organizations to talk about what it would look like to have an ideal set of oral exegetical resources for OBT translators. And they settled on 4 different things. They settled on yeah, here we go. They settled on audio introductions. So they would be about 5-minute introductions to the book. It's to the setting, the background, important themes. Then after that, also 5-minute summaries of books. So these are not told in a descriptive way, but they would be told in a story fashion where people can take them, they can internalize them and story through them, and then have a really oral understanding of how the book is put together. And then there would also be key concept stories. So the key concepts of scripture, which basically the key terms, and the nuances would be explained using the biblical stories in which they appear rather than abstract descriptions. And then the last resource would be a podcast style commentary on every passage of scripture. So it would contain a lot of the types of information as translators' notes, but it wouldn't be necessarily as detailed or as line by line. It would be a conversation and it would be holistic. Now, ideally, all of these resources that we're talking about would be made by a team that was actually doing Bible translation at the time. And the team that's doing Bible translation would work through all of the issues, see what the most reasonable exegetical choices are, and then be able to talk about these things and be able to make the resources after they've already done the work of creating an oral Bible translation. And even more ideally, there would be a model oral Bible translation in language of wider communication, so that when people are listening, they're not just listening to an audio Bible, but they're listening to a true oral Bible translation, and that can spark their creativity as they're doing their own translations into their languages. Now, this group of people commissioned Nathan and the OBT team that he was working with to actually form some of these resources. They had completed the book of Jonah by this time, Nathan's team had, and it had been consultant checked. And so Nathan and his team went through the process of making proofs of concept for each of these resources and then getting them tested by oral Bible translation teams in East Africa and then also in Malaysia to see what they thought of the resources. Now, not even this exegetical team was expecting the results that they would get. Here's the quote that they got from one of these teams. The team said, "How are we ever going to translate the rest of the Bible without these resources?" They had been doing oral Bible translation before this, and when they found how easy it was to listen to the spoken English Bible and then to go through the key concept stories and then the commentary on each one of the passages, they were blown away. Some of these people even listened to this stuff while they were traveling around, doing their normal stuff every day. So while they were on bus rides or walking through the market, and they could show up to the translation meeting already having a really firm grasp on the passage, and they could just start talking through it right then and there. What was perhaps even more interesting, though, is that the English oral Bible translation was also easier for people to connect with emotionally and easier for them to remember than any of the other audio Bibles they were using. So, what this ended up resulting in is that it was an ideal text both to internalize and to spark their creativity for doing their own drafting. So I'm pretty sure that you can guess by now. This was the birth of the Spoken English Bible. One of the members on the team of people who came together had a prominent role in Seed Company at the time, and they applied for the Spoken English Bible and all the resources that we're talking about to become a reality. And they became a reality by God's grace. We now in the Spoken English Bible exist to create a model oral Bible translation in American English and to create a whole suite of exegetical resources, the ones that we've already discussed. In addition, we also put a high emphasis on translating the Bible into equivalent genres. So I'm sure that many of you know what I mean when I say that, but that means that the narratives like Genesis and the Gospels are gripping stories. It means that the Psalms are actually songs that are written in partnership between Hebrew poets Hebrew poetry scholars and then American English songwriters and poets. And then they work with professional artists and mixers to have the songs produced. The Proverbs, we're making them sound like American English proverbs, so they stick in people's minds and they just roll off the tongue. The epistles, we're making them sound like public speeches, like actual sermons where they can be delivered live. And one of my not so secret hopes is that we will get several live recordings where that'll be the official recording, is the epistle being delivered live to a congregation, just like it would have been at first. So at this point in the project's history, we've drafted a number of things. I'll tell you first what we've completed and then what's partially complete. So we've completed all of Ruth, Jonah, and Daniel. Daniel's in the final recording stages now. And the same can be said for Luke, where all of it's been consultant checked, but it's just basically been consultant checked. There's some revisions going on, like a third round. All of you in translation know how this can go on. We've done 30 or something Psalms, about half a dozen Proverbs, and then Genesis 1 through 11. And we're getting the final recordings on those right now. That's a lot of work to do. And yet there's also so much more that could be done because we've been going since about 2022 and it takes a long time. The resources that we produce take at least half of the time of everything that we spend because we put them through checking processes just like we would the translation, and it just means that there's a lot of time that's spent, and that's a feature. It's not a bug, right? We want these to be crafted with care so that when teams use them around the world, they have confidence that these are high quality resources. Now, we're going to go back to a question that I asked at the beginning, and that's, do Americans need oral Bible translation? And you can get a little sneak preview of our answer. And for that answer, I'm actually going to let my co-presenter, Mark Husband, start to unpack that. And as a preface to him unpacking that, I'm going to let you know that our target audience is American English people 18 to 35 who are largely unchurched. So or secular, whatever language you want to use, they have minimal biblical literacy. And we found some really surprising things about their ability to understand most Bible translations, even ones that are traditionally considered meaning-based or dynamic equivalent in American English. So this is Oral Exegetical Tools. It's obthelps.org. Any of you guys can hop onto this right now and start poking around. And we have resources that are made for each book of the Bible. Like if you go for Ruth, there's a lag time. We're trying to figure that on the server because there's some stuff that's kind of beta. But you'll be able to get commentary that's audio commentary on every passage in Ruth. If you look at something like these key concept stories, they'll load in a second. We have things about all sorts of stuff that Bible Project would never think to cover because we're trying to make basically an oral encyclopedia for the Bible. So let's talk about key roles and political groups in the Bible. Um, you have the Magi and magicians, Pharisees and Sadducees, Pharisees. These were just all from the book of Luke itself. We have a lot more in the lineup that are being made or that we want to make. Tax collectors, who are those? Let's look at holidays and events in the Bible. The destruction of the temple, the history of the temple. Um, some of these we definitely have with Bible Project, like the Sabbath, but others we don't necessarily have. One of my favorite things is the cultural beliefs. So these are things like care and compassion, these Hebrew words. What role do those play? A lot of these words they're just key throughout all of the Bible. And you can see we have a lot of these. And the other big difference that I'll say, in addition to this being really like an encyclopedia, is that we give a little description of what the idea is, and then after that we tell stories that flesh out the nuances of meaning. And so there's stories that any team could take, could talk through, they could memorize the stories themselves. A pastor could use one of these things as a sermon outline to preach on this topic. People who are evangelizing or doing discipleship can have these stories connected to the theme and be able to pull those out at any point. And so it's a lot more oral focused than what the Bible Project typically does. And I love their stuff, but their stuff is often thematic and visual, where they're tying together what's happening, sort of make a story of a theme. Whereas we're looking a little bit more at just what does the word mean, like a dictionary entry, but then let's use some stories to explain it.